Thank you for being here today. So I'm going to be talking about animations. And before we start, I would like to ask, how many developers are here? How many designers? OK, we have some. Cool. So before we start, I would like to talk a little bit about myself. So my name is Marcos. I'm from Brazil, but I've been living in Montreal. It's been 4 years. And I'm Google developer expert Android. And I've been speaking a little bit everywhere, New York, London, San Francisco. And I've been working at Mirego in Montreal. And we are hiring, if you're ever looking for a job. And I organized DroidCon Montreal, and I've been happy to organizing GDG Montreal too. So what we'll be talking about today is a little bit, this is the outlines of the thing we'll be talking about today. So we're going to talk about the evolution of mobile, then UX complexities, and meaningful animations and activity transitions. I believe I have enough content for a little bit everyone that will please a little bit everyone. So I hope that once the session is going to be ended, you're going to come out of here with something new, learning something new. But before we start, I have a bit of a story to tell. So I'm an engineer, developer, programmer, whatever. And we developers, we are born and raised to hate designers, right? We don't like what they do, and all those animations, and all those crazy stuff, and all the custom views, and everything. We just don't like it. And I used to live in São Paulo before coming to Montreal. And I tell you, taking the subway, it's not an easy task. And I used to take that every day to come back from work and to go for work. It'd take 2 hours and everything. And it's long. And what do you do when something is long? You use your phone, right? But using your phone, when there are a lot of people like pushing you and everything, it's very complicated. But people still do it because, I mean, what they're going to do? Look at the roof or something? No. And usually you have only one hand because the other one is holding something, or you're just, I don't know, trying to not fall or something like that. And that made me realize that I stopped using some apps, not because I don't like them, but just because they were complicated to use with only one hand, or because it was not very useful when the internet was not very good, because on the subway we did have internet, but it was not the best. So it was weird. It made me realize that a complicated environment demands better apps, and I never thought about it. I never thought about how my users are going to be using my app, when they're going to be using my app, and if at the time they're going to be using it, my app will be the best for them, will be working well, will have a good experience. So by questioning all those things and realizing that's how I fell in love by design and UX, and that's why as a developer I try to make the communication between a designer and a dev the better I can. So the evolution of mobile apps. So at the beginning, it was very simple, right? If you take a look at the first version of Evernote, it's just a list with some actions that you can take, and we would save some notes and everything. And now today, it's a whole huge app. You can create notebooks, you can share notes, you can work together, you can chat. So it became huge. And bigger, that's because of bigger screens. Now we have 6-inch phones, we have 10-inch tablets, some things that we didn't have at the beginning. But the design and the UX didn't evolve as well as the technology, and things got complicated. People just thought, I have more screen, I'm going to put more buttons. I have more screen, I'm going to put more information. So that created unnecessary buttons, lack of context, that created bad use of design strategy, and that's why there's all these things. Oh, should we use a bottom bar? Should we use a navigation drawer? Should we use this or that? So it got to the point where coding an app is not the hardest thing anymore. We all developers, we all know how to code an app. You may have an idea of your app or something that you want to do, but most of you may think, how am I going to do it? Where am I going to start? How does it look like? And what colors will I use? So UX and design, it got, right now, the hardest thing to do on an app today. And that's where I like to talk about motion design. So Material design came in 2014 and it brought a lot of stuff and it helped us a lot. Today, a developer that has no knowledge in design can do a nice app without much effort. But there is one point of material design that is not talked about very much, and I like to point out in my talks, it's exactly motion design. So basically, motion design, I like to resume on those three things. Where things come from, where do they go, what can I do? So by using animations, you can always answer those questions, and by answering those questions, you can guide your user to do better use of your app. So if you take a look what things come from means, it's basically, in this case, for example, I have a button that opens a dialog. It doesn't make sense that I open the dialog from the middle of the screen if my button is on the corner left. So I should make it come from the corner left because that's what my touch is doing. Where do they go? So if I click on something that goes to a detail of something else, why making this appear and appear something that's shared between the two elements, the two screens? Why I can just make them slowly go to the place where they should be and then stay there? And what can I do? Mainly, what can I do is the most important thing. If you think about Android Wear, for example, that's the animation that they use for phone calls. So imagine if they had to put answer and a decline and send a message button everywhere. You just don't have space. It's a very, very small screen. So they use the animations for that. You can see from the right a red button coming in, from the left a green button coming in. So that means I can swipe, and if I swipe, I'm going to answer, I'm going to decline. So by answering all these questions, you can guide your user, and you can tell him what you can do with your app without having to use so many buttons and making things easier. So animations to the rescue. Animations can simplify your app and eliminate unnecessary tutorials or even buttons. Everybody hates tutorials that block the screen just to tell you what a button does, or if you can swipe or not, if you can scroll or not. If you use motion design, all you have to do is just answer those three questions. It's the most important thing, and you should never forget. But it's very important to notice that your animations should make sense, and it should have a reason to exist. Because if it doesn't, it's going to end up like this, and no one wants to have things like this, right, in 2016. It's not because I have an animation that it looks nice, or it's cool, or it's the best thing ever. My presentation was not done in PowerPoint in 1996. Even though it has nice animations, that's not what we want to achieve, right? So cute. So what Android gives us, they give us activity transitions. And we're going to take a look at it, how it works, and I'm going to take a look at the API a bit, and then we're going to go through some screens and through some animations on code, and I'm going to show you how we can achieve some very nice animations with very simple code. I'm not going to be live coding because I'm not brave enough, but I'm going to have screenshots of the code, and you can take a look at how it works. So activity transition is an API introduced on Material Design, from Material Design, introduced on 5.0, Lollipop, and it helps you doing transformations between two screens. We have enter, exit, return, and re-enter, and many other animations, and many other cases that you can use activity transitions, but we're going to be talking about those three. So this is the default activity transition, right? If you don't put anything, if you don't specify anything, it's just going to fade in, fade out. It's not that exciting. So this is a cooler one. If I click on a movie, it just shares the element of the image, and then you can see the details of it and all those stuff. You can do even better. In this case, once the cover gets to its place on the second screen, there is a review animation that shows very nice the cover on the top, and then the other things come in easily with the fading and everything. And you may think that's very hard to do, but it's not, because that's exactly what we're going to see how we can do that right now. So if we go to the basics, so if I want to just have the basic animation, Android gives us some. Android gives us a slide, explode, fade, and some others. If on my activity I just say set enter transition to explode, I'm automatically, just with those 2 lines, I can have this animation. It's cool, right? But then it gets to the point where we were talking about earlier, that just because we can do animations, we should do it. It's just a little too over-exaggerated, and it's a little bit too much, and it may not be what you want to do. We also have the slide, and again, just with those 2 lines of code, we can achieve that animation on the activity. But again, animation should make sense. Choreography should be used to show elements to the screen for the user. Like on the first animation that I showed you, where the shared element goes to its place, and then the text comes from the bottom, but the cover on the top comes from the top, and all those stuff. So let's take a look on how we can do this animation in particular. So in my moves activity, where I have my recycler view, I need access to the element that will be shared. And the element is on the recycler view, right? So I just, on my touch, on my click of my movie, I have to be able to take to access my image view. I need to give it a transition name, which is what Android is going to use to identify what's the other element on the next activity that it can relate to and make them share one thing with the other. And then I have to start activity this way. So the only difference here from a normal start activity that we do is that here I'm gonna pass a bundle that it's made about from the transition animation. So you can use activity options and make scene transition animation. You pass your activity, you pass the image view, in the case it's the shared element, and then you pass its transition name. So in the next activity, I know which transition name I'm talking about and what I want to relate from one to the other. In the detail activity, all I have to do is say the transition name for the image view that is going to be the one that is the same of the last one. And just by doing that, with this 1 line of code that I added at the end, Android framework is going to be able to relate the 2 image views. It's going to know, look, the developer is telling me that those 2 are the same, so I'm going to just make them transition from the first place to the second automatically. And just by doing that, we have an animation that looks like this. So the rest just appears, but you can see that the image view is taking its place on the detail activity automatically by using a very nice animation. And if I go back, it just takes its place back where it was before. Now, I can say that I want it to come from the top. So let's just put an enter transition for the detail activity, because the other things are just appearing. That's not really very nice. So let's do something more cool. So if I put that the enter transition of the detail is coming from the top, that's the result that we have. Still, it's not that good, right? We want this one. Oops. We want this one, which is the one that is the coolest one, where the shared element transition takes place, and that the things come differently from the top, and the other one from the bottom, and everything makes really much sense, and I can draw attention from the user to the things that I want. So I first want the user to take a look at the cover of the movie, and then I want the user to take a look at the detail of the movie. Like the name of the talk says, I'm guiding the user. So I have this, and now I'm gonna make it more intelligent. I'm gonna tell him what you're gonna do. So I want just the toolbar. So I just want the cover on the top to come from the top. I don't want the rest coming from the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a slide animation just by starting a new object. And I'm going to say add target. And who's the target? Is the toolbar. Then I want the text to come from the bottom, the detail and the title and everything. So I just have to create the same slide, but then I'm going to say that the gravity is bottom, so things can come from the bottom. And then I just add target. And by adding target, it automatically excludes the rest. So once I put one, it just gets the other views of my screen, and it just ignores them. And then I need a transition set, because those two animations need to happen at the same time. In this case, it's not really at the same time. It's one after the other. So I can say that the ordering of this animation is going to be sequential. And then I say get window transition, the get window, and I do set enter transition, the transition set. And the result of the code that I just showed you is this. It didn't actually work, did it? And that's the frustrating part. That's where you thought it was very exciting, the activity transition. You saw some guy from somewhere saying that it was cool and that you should use it. You tried to use it, and it didn't work. So you're there, you take a look at your code, and you're like, my code makes sense. Like, that's what they have on their documentation. Why it doesn't work? And then you're there at 3 a.m., you don't know what's happening, and you're frustrated, and you're like really, really frustrated why it doesn't work. And then you're gonna see the documentation. The documentation doesn't say anything, and what do you do? Well, Android is open source, so you can take a look on the activity transition code, and that's exactly what I said. And that's exactly what I did, actually. So before a transition starts, the framework constructs the set of transitioning views. So basically, it goes on the hierarchy of my interface, and it goes view by view of my root layout, and it takes a look. Should I animate it? Does it have an animated transition? Is it visible? Is it a transition group? And then I was like, OK, so looking at this code from the source code of activity transition, it looks like my views needs to be a transition group, so it can animate using activity transitions. And I was like, what is a transition group? Well, basically, yeah, if you take a look, it checks if it's visible. If it's not visible, that means I don't need it to animate. And then it checks if it's a transition group. If it's not a transition group, what the framework does is, OK, this view, it's not a transition group. But is it a view group? It is. Does it have childs? It does. So I'm going to take a look at the childs to see if they are a transition group, to see if I can animate them too. So the framework considers views with background a transition group. It's as simple as that. But it's not written anywhere. And that's where things get tricky. Of course, that's not the only way saying that you have a transition group. You can also say explicitly in the code, set transition group true. So that way you make even if you don't want to have a background, let's say you want the background to be transparent, but you want to animate a group of things, you can just say that your view group is a transition group. So if we take a look at our layout, we have a card view. And inside the card view, we have a linear layout with the text. So basically, what happened before and why my animation didn't work was because the framework went through my layout. And it saw, look, I have a card view. So, and this card view has a linear layout. And what happened really was, look, I can't find anything that is a transition group. Your text view doesn't have a background. Your linear layout doesn't have a background. And your card view doesn't have a background. And in any place, you said that those are transition groups, so I'm just going to ignore it. I'm not going to animate it. Even though I explicitly said on my code before that I want my 3 text views to animate. So to fix this, all I have to do is, look, I don't want my card view to be a transition group. Because by doing that, it's going to take a look at my child. And when it gets to the linear layout, it's going to see, look, the linear layout doesn't have a background either, so it's not a transition group. So it's going to go to the other layout where it's going to find the text views. And just by this one line, I can make it work. Like it was supposed to. So just by this one line, I was able to make my text appear and everything doing great. But it's not good enough yet. Because if we take a look when it comes back, it kind of glitches, right? When it comes back to where it was before, things just, I don't know, you're going to see the card view glitches and disappears. That's not really what I want. It's not perfect yet. So how do we fix this? We can create an exit transition. But at the exit, the only difference is I don't want my text to go to the bottom. I don't want my text to slide to the bottom, doing the contrary of what I did before, going to the up. I want the whole card view to disappear. It's more elegant and it's more nice. I don't care about guiding my user at this point because things are just disappearing. So I'm going to say, you know what, the card view, now I want it to be a transition group. And then I put slide from up to the toolbar and slide from bottom to the card view. And then I settle on transition set. And at this point, I want it to happen at the same time. Because like I said, it was just disappearing, so I just wanted to get out of my way the fastest possible. And then I set an exit transition and a return transition. You can take a look at the documentation, but the difference between an exit transition and a return transition is that if I'm in an activity and I call another one, so this activity that I just called the other one, it's exiting. If I went to activity and then I came back to where I was before, I'm returning. So that's a returning animation. And you can have different animations to each transition that you're doing. So, and then before I leave my transition, before I leave my activity by doing a back button, I'm going to just create this exit transition that I just put it on a method. And by doing that, I have this. And when it comes away, you can see that the card goes to the bottom, the cover art on the top just disappears, and everything looks greater. It's way more pleasing to the eyes. It's still not perfect, though. I want it better. So when the text slides up, I want it also to fade in. I don't know. I just think it's nicer. So all I have to do is create a fade, and to the same ones that I'm sliding up, which are the text, I'm going to set fades, fade in, fade out. And I'm going to create a transition set because I want the slide that is happening for the text happen at the same time as the fade, but I still want them to be the last animation to happen. So I create a transition set to make the slide from bottom and the fade happen at the same time, and I put it together, and then I put it after the slide from up from the cover on the top. And by doing that, oops. And by doing that, we achieve this. It's way nicer. We have the shared element. We have the text that slides from the bottom with the fade in, and everything looks greater. And it's just perfect. And it didn't take much time, right? It's like 10 lines of code, 12. There's a bonus. I don't know if we have time. So the review animation, which is cooler. I can make my animation on the top happen. So this is also only available on Lollipop and Up. And I can do on the detail. All I have to do is, so when my shared element gets to where it should be, at this point, I want to review the cover on the top. So I can set an enter shared element callback. And by doing that, I have a on shared element end. So when its animation ends, I want to animate my cover on the top. And by doing that, I can use view animation utils, which is available from Lollipop and Up. And this class has a method called create circular review. And all we have to do is just pass the toolbar, set the position where the circle is going to start, and until where it's going to grow. What's the radius of its growth to do the animation. In this case, the size of the card view does the job. I put it on a handler so it can wait, so it can less what I want. And I do a post delay, just to be sure that things are happening on time and it's not going to lag. It's always cool to wait a bit so things doesn't happen many things at the same time. So basically, when the shared element gets to the point where it was supposed to be, I can just say, wait a little bit more, 300 milliseconds, and then do the review animation. Every time you do a review animation, you have to make your view, which was invisible before, to become visible right before calling the review animation. It's a requirement. If you don't do that, it's not going to work. Another thing that is not written in documentation. That's the beauty of open source, in my opinion. So that's it. Just by doing that, we have the review animation on the top, and now my screen looks way, way nicer. So to wrap up, activity transition is easy to use once you understand how it works. And I hope you do right now. It has limited customization due to the transition group handling. So if you want something, a view group to animate, and you want its child to animate differently, it's complicated, then it's not going to work. You can do or one or the other. And it's only available on Lollipop and more. What's cool, though, is that so Mirago, we have some apps that have more than 500,000 downloads. We did Bell 5, and we did iHeartRadio Canada. And one of the things that I can tell you is that only 10% of our users are on 4.4 and before. So 90% is Lollipop and up. So it's really worth it to invest your time on those animations. And you have to think like an animator. Like we saw before, the way you structure your layout and the way you put it together, it really impacts on how far you can go on the animations that you want to do. That's exactly what I just said. Thank you. And if you want to take a look at this example that I just did, it's on my GitHub. And if you want to have access to my slides, I'm going to be posting on my Twitter, so follow me on Twitter. And if you're very interested about doing transition animations and doing your own the way you want, there will be a code lab right after lunch where I'm going to be leading, and we're going to be doing some nice activity transitions there. Thank you.